was back in 1993 I started doing a project with the University of Melbourne in the Ian Potter Art Conservation Centre. And this first project was working on 174 mainly illuminated Middle Eastern manuscripts. It was quite extraordinary. I felt very, very lucky, and I took that as some sort of sign from the heavens that this is what I should be doing, because I'd been offered this work. And it was in these early days that I first came across problems with leather-covered bindings, and this is what really set off my career, because I'm one of those people that likes to know why something is the way it is and if there's anything I can do about it, and that's what drives me as a conservator, I suppose, as well. So that's when I first became interested in understanding the conservation of leather as well, the leather on a book. The work I do is in two streams really. It's the practical conservation side, plus I do a lot of teaching as well. I get asked to deal with specific kind of curly conservation problems with leather, particularly acid decayed leather and other materials like photographs that are very reactive and very sensitive to acids. The problem with something like a book as opposed to a static object in a display case in a museum is people want to handle them and they want to use them. So with a book, you always step into the realm of restoration with what you do, that you are going to physically, irreversibly alter this object in order so that it opens correctly. There's two key things I need to consider. There's the historical binding structure, and there's the significance, intellectual significance, or historical significance of the contents of a book, whether it's a photograph, an illustration, the text itself, how it is printed, and also how it's housed, the protective housing, which is the bookbinding structure. This book, which I'd mentioned earlier today, and I'd taken off one of the linings in order to access the spine of this to do some repairs to the book, is an example of the physical damage to this is caused by poor handling. So if I hold this up, you can see that there's a split in that. And the dealer that brought me this object had said, when I first viewed this, it didn't have a split in it. But as a result of the poor handling, they've gradually split this open. And the fundamental problem with these structures is they're not meant to be open too wide. And traditionally they were consulted either in the hand or on these wooden crossed book supports that kept the book at an opening like something like that. So as you would expect with Western bindings, that it's going to open relatively easily and it'll have a wide opening. These books were never intended for that. So when I finish the work on this book will go back to opening somewhere like this and not what it's doing now. Every book I've ever come across, although it may be typical of a style, will have something different about it. Whether it's what they've done with these end bands, these ornaments, how they've woven the end bands, how they've sewed it up might be slightly different to normal. I mean, this is, I've not come across one that's been attached like this with a piece of very inflexible parchment, which is partly contributing to this stiffness, why it's breaking down, and that was so easy to remove. I need to understand the structure of a binding before I can start to disassemble it in any way. That's what I'm expected to be able to do as a conservator, and this is one of the things that supposedly separates me from just a straight restorer who goes in and says, I will make this look like it's new, where I'm also concerned with retaining the integrity of the history of this individual book. An example of this morning was insect holes. So there was evidence of where this book had been before, and the insect damage itself wasn't causing any sort of physical damage. It wasn't going to be promoted if you kept opening the book. It was stagnant, and it was in a part of the structure that wasn't causing further damage. You could see it. In restoration, I might be expected to fill that in, but in conservation, it is part of the history of this object. It's what makes it unique from the next copy of that book. Documentation is the thing that defines or just as a distinction between conservation and restoration, because I am expected to, as part of my professional association and ethically, to keep sound records of everything that I do before, during and after. So documentation starts for me in private conservation practice with having to go to the client site, or the objects are brought here, and I do an estimate. I thoroughly examine the objects. At this stage I can't do any kind of destructive testing. It's just a visual examination and determination of an estimate of work, of what I can do with these objects. If I've had to wash a book, I show the process of myself and usually an assistant washing a book, because people don't quite believe that you've washed a book, which means disbinding the structure and washing the individual folios to remove usually dirt, staining, particularly water damage. You'll leave a lot of staining, and mould. I had been given some very sound advice earlier on in Melbourne and in London. If you want to do this, you need to be a bookbinder. If you're not a bookbinder, you won't understand how to be a sound book conservator, because you won't understand the structure of a book. You'll just be tearing things apart and learning as you disbind them. So, and that was, that's brilliant advice, and I thoroughly recommend that. Anyone who I work with and I teach, I give them bookbinding training, or I send them for bookbinding training, because they need to know that. And it also builds up the basic hand skills, because you do duplicate techniques. When you repair a binding structure, you're duplicating almost the hand actions of the bookbinder. And it's quite important that you know, and you almost think like how they thought when they did that.